I'm going to share with you two stories tonight. The first one is a testimony, and the second story is an offering. In 1948, the United States Immigration Service was deporting 28 Mexican workers from Oakland, California to the San Diego border. An hour into the flight, they were doing this by airplane, and an hour into the flight, the left wing caught fire and was torched off, and the plane came spiraling down into Los Gatos Canyon in central California, San Joaquin Valley, the agricultural hub where I'm from. The newspaper accounts only mention the names of the four American crew members, the pilot, co-pilot, the stewardess, and the immigration officer, but referred to the Mexicans only as deportees, omitting their names altogether from all the accounts. To add insult to injury, the Mexican workers, the 28 of them, their remains were pushed into the largest mass grave in California's history, unmarked, where they were left anonymous for 7 decades, while the remains of the American crew members were all sent back home to their families. Now, at the time, one of our greatest American folk heroes, Woody Guthrie, heard about this incident. He didn't like that they weren't given their names in their death, so he decided to write a poem about this incident. And in that poem, he attempts to restore the dignity of the 28 Mexican passengers. And he writes in the poem, he actually attempts to restore the dignity by assigning them fake names because he doesn't know their names. So he writes, "Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita, adios mis amigos Jesus y Maria. You won't have a name when you ride that big airplane. All they will call you will be deportee." Now, it only existed as a poem for 9 years, until a 20-year-old college student by the name of Martin Hoffman picks up Woody's lyrics and decides he's going to add a melody to it. And he sits down in his tiny little apartment, not more than an hour north of here in Fort Collins, Colorado. He sits there and he puts the melody to these words, and it becomes a song that was then passed on to Pete Seeger, who passed it on to Joan Baez. Joan Baez took that song all around the world. It's been recorded in many languages in different parts of this world, and pretty soon it's been recorded by everyone under the sun. Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen and Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson, everyone has recorded that song. I like to think that that song hung in the air long enough, 7 decades, for the son and grandson of migrant farm workers to come along and decide he wanted to answer the question posed in Woody Guthrie's lyrics. He wrote, "Who are these friends all scattered like dry leaves? The radio says they're just deportees. Who are these friends?" So in 2010, I discovered the mass grave was just a few miles from my home in Central California. And I decided that I would go looking for the names. And after I found the names, I wasn't satisfied, so I began to look for the stories, because our names are just a symbol of who we are, but our stories is what our humanity is made up of. Of course, it was a journey that I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know where it would take me. And pretty soon it was a journey that took me from California to the New York Islands and all around central Mexico also. And witnessing firsthand the power of stories had a profound impact on me. And that's what I want to share with you this evening. When I found the first family in Guanajuato, something magical began to happen. As I was asking them questions about who they were, they began to ask themselves questions within the family, questions that they had never asked before. They started to ask one another and their elders, about their past, memories, old history. They started asking their elders about even family secrets, things that they didn't want to talk about once upon a time. Now they were afforded the distance of time to speak about this. And then something even more magical occurred, and that's that once I started to find other families, those families had their own process as well, but pretty soon they started to talk to one another. And as more families came, the more sharing happened. Suddenly it occurred to me that what's happening here is not just a collective wound, but now we had a process towards a collective healing. That blew my mind. It was an incredible realization. And then the shift occurred. I actually didn't have to look for families anymore. They started to find me. And with that momentum in 2018, also the California Senate found me. They contacted me and they said, "We'd like to invite you and the passengers of the families and Joan Baez to the Senate and do a formal recognition of this incident, which was a big deal because no governmental entity for 7 decades had ever, admitted to the accident, much less recognized it formally. So we went to the Senate, as you see there, and they read the names out loud on the Senate floor in a moving ceremony. And I started to feel like, this is something of a closure. And of course, a few years prior to that, in 2013, when I first found the names, we actually raised money from donations all around the world who donated money to install this headstone with all the names there at the burial site, which we did in 2013. Thank you. And then, so now we had the Senate thing, and all of a sudden I felt like there were some types of various closures happening here, And then last month, we actually installed the memorial at the crash site itself. And I started to feel like, this is a closure of some kind. It felt like the closing of the final chapter of the story. So I turned to one of the families next to me and I said to them, because we invited all the families, and I said, does this feel like a closure to you? The woman's name was Maria, and she said, no, it doesn't feel like a closure. It feels like an opening. It feels like this is a new time, a new day for my family now. And the other families echoed that sentiment. And it occurred to me that if I had to distill this all down into one sentence, it would be this: that one story shared with another is medicine, but many stories shared in community is transformation. Thank you. But that's not the story that I wanted to share with you. This is the real story, the offering. This is the offering. So in 2015, this is during my first search in central Mexico, I stayed at the home of a family in Guanajuato, and the man's name, he was an octogenarian, 85 years old. His name was Don Miguel Perez. Don Miguel actually was a bracero worker in the 40s, and he actually personally knew 2 of the passengers on that airplane. And I was staying at his home while I was doing my research in that community and interviewing people. And on the last day, I was going to leave the next day, and the last day I was there, and that morning, over breakfast, he looks at me and he says, did you get all the stories? Did you interview everybody? I said, yes, I sure did. Thank you. And he says, everybody told you the stories? They all shared with you? I said, yeah, they did. And he said, okay, good. Did they tell you the horse story? And I said, the horse story? And he said, el caballo raro. He said, el caballo raro. And I said, the rare horse. And I said, no, I don't know the horse story. Tell me the horse story, Don Miguel. He proceeds to tell me this story. He says, in 1992, a farmer by the name of Daniel Cardenas went to go check on his fields the next morning after a torrential rainstorm had passed through. And as he's walking home, he sees on the cobbled street a stone that was upturned. He decides to put the stone back into the hole. And he looks down and he sees what appears to be like a skull of some kind. So he pulls another stone back and another back, and he suddenly realizes this looks like a horse. But he's not certain because it looks a little off. So he calls some of the other farmers who are nearby, and they come over and they look down into the hole and they go, yeah, Daniel, that looks like a horse. But you're right, the head is a little oblong. The front legs are too short. The back legs are too long. Maybe it's a prehistoric horse. Let's go call La Maestra. Now, La Maestra that's just how they refer to her. She's the first woman who left that community, got a degree, returned, and she became a teacher. So they just call her La Maestra. La Maestra comes back over. She looks into the hole and she sees what they're looking at. And she says, yes, gentlemen, that looks like a fossil of some kind. Now, if you know people from Guanajuato, they pride themselves in their knowledge of horses. So they were really, really excited about this fossil being found there because it obviously blows away the idea that horses are not indigenous to Mexico, that horses were from Europe. So they were like, bull, the horses are not just from Mexico, but they're from our community, So La Maestra goes, I'm going to call my colleagues at the university. So she gets on the phone. 4 paleontologists come in a van. They're salivating over the idea of a fossil. So they look down into the hole, and sure enough, they confirm, ladies and gentlemen, it's a horse from the Pleistocene era, from the Ice Age. And they're really excited because not only is it just a horse, but it's the most fully intact specimen they've ever found. It was only missing 3 phalanges. So they're excited. So they tell the community, help us lift the horse out of the bed and put it in the back of our van so we can take it back to the university and do tests. And the whole community goes, wait a minute. You're not taking that horse anywhere. So the paleontologists look over to La Maestra and then they have a little conversation. Let's go have a conversation. Sí, cómo no, sí, claro, del caballo, sí. So they look back over here and then La Maestra says, ladies and gentlemen, what they're proposing is that if we help them put the horse in the van, they'll do tests. And when they're done with their tests, they're going to return it to us in a glass case with signage. And they're going to give us all this knowledge and experience about this horse. And we're going to get to share that with the world and keep it here in our community. Someone in the back says, will they sign papers saying that? I'm kidding. They don't say that. But anyway. So the community says, yeah, sure. By then, the entire entire town was there, gathered around this hole. So the gentleman said, yeah, let's help them. So they start to lift that horse out of its ancient bed. And there's photographs that exist of this and even video where you can see the community lifting the horse all together collectively. They put it into the back of the van, and the van takes off, and all the paleontologists are waving goodbye, and all the community saying goodbye to the horse, and they never see the horse again. Now, Don Miguel Perez looks at me from across the breakfast table and he says, maybe you can help us find the horse. And I said, what makes you think, Don Miguel, I could find horses? He says, well, you found us. So I got on the airplane the next morning, flew home, thinking about Don Miguel's assignment, and I tried to make sense of why he would tell me this story on my last day there. What was he trying to tell me? And this is what I came up with. I think it was Don Miguel's way of telling me, whatever you've gotten from here, whatever anyone has given you from this place, whatever you're taking with you, bring it back. So on that note, I want to say to Naropa, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to give a little something back from a place that has given me so much. Thank you.